Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unfolding the Soul. Today, my guest is Bruce. He's a Calvinist software developer with four children, and he has an affinity for music, which is going to be the subject of our discussion today. Um, so, Bruce, what do you define as music?
Um, I would say as a joyful noise is the easiest way to say it. But I would also say a way to structurally portray beauty or an idea um, through song, whether that's instrumental or vocal.
Okay, so um, I want to poke a little bit at this portrayal of an idea. Can you expand on what that means?
Yeah, sure. So, what we're the portraying your ideas, truths, false, emotions, based on truth, um, feelings that are difficult to describe in words, or even that are easy to describe in words. Attempting to come at that with the art of song or melodies and rhythm. um, that's kind of what I think people are attempting to do when they create music or portray ideas through music.
Is that also what you try to do?
Yeah, I think so. There, it is interesting though because there are different. There's different uses for the same art in some ways. They all kind of strike at something similar, but they can be used in different ways. Is this kind of that discussion between like is propaganda art or is art art, or can music be propaganda? Is music art? But I think there are different facets of music um, that can be seen from multiple directions. But what I try and do is use that in many ways. Because there's so many applications for music.
So is there a reason why you're exploring these many ways? Is that because you're trying to look for the way, or you want to have like sort of a grasp on all the options, or?
I think I'm mostly just trying to attempt to describe what seems to arise somewhat naturally, or um, even maybe ontologically out of life. So there are purposes that people have, and how is music used in those purposes? And sometimes that's there's a lot of reasons there. There's for sake of you have a lack of words that you couldn't have the propositional language to describe what you're wanting to describe, and so you just make noise, and sometimes that noise is put together in a pattern or a structure that other people can relate with and maybe repeat. um, that would be the most basic. And I also think that we're born with a nature that wants to create music in some form.
Mhm. So is there a particular goal that you strive for when you make music?
Yeah, that's what I mean. There are two different ways of doing it, I guess, or more than two, but there's many ways that achieve it. Sometimes I like to create just to see where my skills lie. Like, I could be walking around and have a melody in my head, and sometimes it's difficult to put the melody into onto sheet music or to on the keys or onto the guitar. But I'll try that sometimes, and I'll just have a motif or an idea of melody or rhythm in my head, and I may pick up an instrument and try to play it. Why? This is interesting. Why do I want to play it? Sometimes it's an earworm, and it just keeps going on in my head over and over, and whether that's original or something I've heard before that I just keep repeating for some reason. It just seems to be the way that like some of my self talk works. I just have this, you know, melody or rhythmic pattern that occurs as I'm doing things. It especially happens when I'm like most recently I was building a gazebo or pergola, out structure outside, and if I'm not listening to music, it just while I'm moving, I'm hearing a melody or a rhythm in my head as I'm doing things, and I think it helps me probably helps me keep momentum in some way. I'm not really sure why, but I think we have a nature that just sort of wants to um, be pattern, rhythmic or melodic in some fashion. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, and I think that's part of our nature that God created us with.
Mhm. And so the music is making that somewhat explicit. So is there any value in having that what is inside as explicit? Like, does that allow you for new insights or?
I think so. I think also it tends to um, solidify and otherwise what might be considered an abstract feeling or thought that isn't really put in a particular place. So you can say, okay, I've had this thing kind of rolling around in my brain. Let me put it down. It's sort of an almost an anxious energy sometimes. That could be unique to me though. I don't really have any basis to say that's universal, but
So is the solidifying something like naming it, like it's anchoring it, it's giving it a body, I guess.
maybe that's one way to see it. I suppose you're kind of creating a tangible form of what only existed in your thoughts or sounds, so that you can. One of the things I think happens with music, especially with singing or putting things into instrumentation, is it takes what was somewhat of a difficult concept to distill down to someone else, and you're able to sort of distill down. You kind of do this with language in a way, what you were feeling, thinking, or had in your brain. And so sometimes it's for repeatability, so you could do it again. And other times it's just to like, hey, listen, let me listen to this, and maybe other people would listen to it too. But it just kind of creates a tactile, or a feeling that was only once immaterial to the material now. Well, I would say, physically material. It's debatable whether or not the thoughts in your brain are material or not, but that's it's possible they are.
Yeah. Well, there's a sense of well, the thing that isn't there, right? Like in some sense, it isn't real yet, right? Like
Hmm.
there's a potential or something, and you're grasping at it, and then when you put it out there, right? Like then, like you said, it is solidified, right? Like it it's now spoken.
Right. I think it also makes it easier to fix or reshape it as you go on. So, like, you may have a feeling in your brain or a melody or rhythm, and you never build upon it very well, or maybe you wish that you could expand it because you enjoyed that initial rhythm. And so putting it down makes you analyze that piece, and maybe in more things will arise out of that. So, you kind of have the ability to experience the manifestation of the feeling or the music. And then I think it will give birth to a lot of other new ideas when you do that.
Hmm. So in some sense, you're taking it out of time, and then that allows you to reflect on it in a different way than you just experience it in the
Right.
flow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to feel the music in your brain and then put it down on paper or in an instrument or in some way manifest it, physically. And I think that's where the some of the best composers in history have been able to take what's in their brain and put it on paper or on an instrument and have others experience a portion of that themselves. I don't know that it's possible truly for a person to experience it the same way. We'll just take Beethoven, for instance, who's famous for this sort of thing where he would had just melodies all over his brain all the time and would have to put them into, a piano piece or a score, for an entire orchestra. I would imagine, only because I've felt this way, putting it down, it's never quite as clear as it was initially in your brain. But other times it makes clarity out of something that was otherwise chaotic.
Hmm.
Because sometimes it's hard to recreate that initial feeling of melody that you once had. How do I get that back? It's kind of this feeling of, man, I had this euphoric or this dopamine, whatever language you want to use, the initial conception of the song or the tune of the melody, and it felt so good at the time. It's always hard to get that back, I think, to the way that it once was when it was truly the first time you had experienced it. I think people see this in lots of things in their lives. And you also tend to build things up in your brain or in your thoughts or feelings. Then you experience them, and they're not satisfying as you may have thought they should be. This is really an interesting lane of music talk, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So what it brought up to me is your programming, right? So in some sense, the music is like a graphical user interface, right? Which is presenting, well, what is behind it to the user, right? And
Mhm.
then like, can you really present to the person the thing that, right, like the idea in your head that is, yeah, that gives birth to all of these things on the screen.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to see it in some ways. Um, yeah, I mean, I think many graphic UI or UX designers could put themselves in the position of art. Music is just maybe another medium of art, but yeah, you can see that it's sort of the canvas creation when you're putting it down on paper or onto an instrument or into song. You're creating the canvas that other people can see. Um, and I think some people have this. There's a whole world of thought where like you shouldn't let anyone see your art, right? Is that the motivation for creating it? I don't know how I feel about that. I you know I don't think that we are to keep it in. I think it's good to be reoriented though, because we have a lot of part of our nature is imperfect. So it's good to also put things out there to be corrected. Um, and I think that's part of our nature too, is to correct one another and bear with each other our failings in some way. So sometimes putting out the thoughts or the ideas of music that you might have in your brain and putting them out there for correction or just to consumption, and then they may be corrected, um, will yield, growth, fruit, sanctification, however you want to see it for the individual.
Mhm. So you're religious, right? You're a Christian. So
Right.
is there a connection with the worship and the music as well?
Yeah, for me personally, I mean, that's kind of how I got brought into the church was music initially. So it has a a fond memory for my growth. Um, Music is how I engaged with the church at large from an early age. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah,
and I
but we'll
think
get into that, I guess.
yeah,
Because
yeah, but but there's also like I do believe that there's a principle of worship music for others to um, consume, that's practical and also theological, um, for my convictions. Uh,
Mhm.
and
So
I'm,
so how's that distinct from other music?
um, so music created for the corporate worship venue or the gathering of the saints in obedience, I think has a particular purpose that should be accessible and and hold to the same confession that you all are gathering and holding to. Um, there's a particular regulative principle that comes by way of what I would say is Scripture special revelation that gives us this in a way that we should gather, sing, and worship. And so, in the same way that we have a lot of passions, desires, and um, you know ambitions, those ambitions are and passions and desires are corrected and funneled in a way that is, um, I think, prosperous for the church at large by way of the church itself. So you have that way of guiding you, to keep you straight and narrow, as it were, and the submission to that body, the church, is how the music would fit.
Mhm. Yeah, it has to be submitted. Is because you're making a connection to a propositional claim, right, of profession, but
Mhm.
you're also more relating to a spirit when you're talking about submission, right? Where
In the
there's
case of submission, I'm saying submitting the music to the body at large, the church, and to God's law. So our submission to that um, should strive to, um, as Christians, in my case, when I say we Christians should strive to um, perform our acts of worship in a way that is pleasing to God. And the way that we would know what's pleasing to God is how He's told us what is pleasing to Him, and the way we know or have been told or taught what is pleasing is through His special revelation, the Word, by way of the church.
okay. So yeah, let's start about your first experience with music.
Oh, I don't know. My first experience in music, I'm sure it's in
Well,
the womb at some point.
the one that you remember that stood out.
That's really hard to say. I've thought of this before. Um, I don't know. I mean, I'll just go back to a formative part. I was 11 years old, I think. And we were in class and in school, and a part of our morning routine was to sing a song in the class, I thought was cool. And I was singing, and my teacher came up to me and said, "You need to go see the choir director uh, because you can sing." And so that really, I guess, launched me into the choir career or choir realm at sixth grade, so 11 years old or so. Uh, that's one of the earliest experiences I had when someone said, "Hey, you can sing," or "Hey, you can perform." Now, I also had before that I'd been started like I started at I think 9 years old playing saxophone, but singing wasn't something that I think. I mean, I did it in school as part of corporate singing with other people in church, if I had ever gone, but that was the first time where someone told me you need to pursue this. Um, the reason why it's formative is because it really did shape the direction of the choices that I made later. Um, because I shaped my choices of school and desires to that music uh, progression. It's part of the reason why I went to college. It's part of the reason why I went to church. All of those things, because I was pursuing music as a passion, and truly was what is the term? I guess inspired or affirmed that that was a good thing to pursue.
So being in a choir, especially in a church, means that you're performing a lot.
Yeah,
Was that
sure.
a change from having music through lessons, or?
Mm, hmm. I think it is different actually because I've done two different kinds of lessons taking. I've done lessons one on one with a teacher, but you also in a choir and in band you get lessons like corporately. So they'll sort of teach the entire group, and you have to try and replicate what they're telling you to do. So yeah, there is a difference there. But it's it's harder. But I will say, like the majority of the progress made, at least skill wise, in music, is individual. And for me, is the time in the practice room, or with you and your instrument, whether that's your voice or your instrument that you hold or touch. That time you put in the woodshed, as it were, and grind away at improving the craft or attempting to get better at what you want to come out of your head or what you should be practicing. Um, there's no substitute for hard practice and hard work in that regard.
Mhm. Is is there a way that you learn, or are you just literally grinding and repeating stuff, or are you trying to do things in a specific manner?
Yeah, I think I have a pretty good ear. When I say that, I mean I can hear something and play it on piano or guitar or vocals pretty well. So the way I practiced for a long time was to listen to something and attempt to recreate it. And then that sort of came with like the idea of creation of my own stuff. So I would hear it in my head and attempt to create it. But there's a whole other skill, that the pedagogical skill or the learning, that was, it was somewhat harder for me in some ways because um, there's a craft to honing the skills around like particular music. For instance, if your teacher or professor gives you pieces to learn, scales, um, songs, whatever, doing them to a level of perfection or a level that's acceptable, that was always harder for me. But I did okay at that. I did fine at that. But I didn't enjoy it in the same way that I enjoyed. There's a different type of satisfaction. There's a satisfaction of like, man, I created this out of something in my head, or I heard something and now I can play it. That's awesome. And then there's another satisfaction of like, I practiced this piece or these sets of arpeggios for my, professor for hours and hours and hours, and he said, "Good job." That's another set of satisfaction. Um, one is, I think, one is easier to pull off than the other for some people. Um, but it's one of the things that people tend to think is there's less joy in the pursuit of a piece that's pre-written and you have to grind it out and do it well. Some people find less joy in that. I think I might be in that camp too. It was much harder. It was much less fun than the spontaneous sort of things that I would do. But I also think that they're essential because they helped shape my skills and get better because it forces me to kind of go outside of what I'd been comfortable in.
Hmm. So when you got into the choir, was all this more advanced understanding already there, or were you just overwhelmed by what was presented to you?
Um, it's hard to remember. I already knew how to read music because I'd been reading it since I think second or third grade with basic. We would start in rhythm instruments in school, and then the recorder, which is a basic sort of um, clarinet type instrument that's made of plastic in our case. So I'd already been reading. It was advanced in that you learn to control an aspect of your body that you had really taken for granted, I guess, which is your wind, breath, and vocal cords. Um, I think I take that for granted probably today, even still. But there's a interesting skill of learning to manipulate your vocal cords and have what you hear in your head come out your mouth without manipulating a machine to do it. It comes easier as you keep doing it, but thinking about it now, it still is kind of a wild concept in a way that I can hear a pitch and sing it in my head, um, or hear it on the piano. And I don't have perfect pitch, which is a whole other thing. Which is if you told me to sing a C sharp right now, I wouldn't be able to without hearing it first. But I could make a note and sing it. But I can't. I still can't quite understand how that translates. I think it's really hard to describe it. But that was one of the more difficult things with music. I think was learning to control your, at least with choir, learning to control your breath and to hear before you sing the notes that you want to come out. That's a hard skill. I imagine artists are in some of that camp where they see something in their brain and then they could put it on paper. Um, I've never pursued that very much. I think that's pretty difficult. But it's similar in this way, I guess. You hear a pitch and you sing it.
Mhm. So you're put on this trajectory by going into the choir. So how does that trajectory go?
Well, one of the cool things was, I mean, just like anecdotally or initially, was I was in this technical drawing class, or sorry, not technical drawing, technical like engineering sort of. I forgot what they called it. Anyway, I got out of that because I took a new elective called choir. And that was great because I really hated this other class. It was just like in sixth grade. We're building like bridges out of toothpicks, that kind of thing, that engineering thing. I really didn't like that class. And not that the teacher or anything was bad, I don't think. I don't remember all the details, but I just remember it was great to do choir instead. So that kind of became the pursuit, the trajectory for me to the point where I had decided to pursue music seriously. I auditioned for multiple choirs. I was in church choirs of places I didn't even really go to. I just wanted to go sing. Whenever there was an opportunity to sing, I just took the opportunity. Um, it was a lot of fun. I think also there's a pride aspect in there that is hard to to maintain humility in that when you and I it's something you have to come to grips with. But like if you're decent at something and you like it and you like getting praise for it, sometimes that's like a bad that's a bad trajectory because you start just doing all things for praise. So or at least in that regard. So, but it was nice to feel good, at that, to be, I made like all state choir, you know what I mean? Auditions. I was good at sight singing and sight reading. So leading up to high school, I pursued music as a career or as a college degree. But I had also pursued music in the church, which is where I really got proper exposure to the body of believers, um, those who worshipped God with their song, um, outside of mere choral music that I thought was old and good to learn, but I didn't really take it seriously until I had gotten older and started leading other people in song at church, like specifically. So that trajectory put me into college. At that very college, I met my now wife. So had I not pursued that discipline, I wouldn't have been at that school to meet my wife there. So that trajectory was fundamental, and just instrumental rather in getting me where I am today.
I like the pun.
Yeah, that was a good pun.
So yeah, the thing that piqued me is so you're seeing people in true worship, I guess, where in the choir, and so you're coming into contact with this, well, I guess, way of being during the singing that is alien to you at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we had been doing like even in choir and in school, we'd done like a number of church songs, as it were. Latin mass type, like the order of the mass, lots of different pieces from history that were based in scripture or God or church, but I'd never really put them together until I guess I just sort of approached them as merely words on a page and just to get the music portion out and not focus on the content. Well, that once I started to pursue that in the um, church more, and also a really big shift happened at about 15 when I got my first guitar and learned guitar. I taught myself, and I could sing and play at the same time. Um, it really changed a lot for me. It opened up doors, and so I was able to go places and sing and play. And that guitar, and I didn't learn piano. I guess I could have learned. I didn't learn piano till college, really, not truly learn it. I guess I could have been singing and playing that, but even so, it opened up a lot of doors and opportunities to go play at churches. And I was exposed to preaching the word, exposed to the gospel very head on, in a deliberate way, that I think just convicted me and changed my life at that point, forever.
Yes. So what do you mean head on? Like what is this shift? Like, like
Um, so I was I was in multiple bands, in different churches, and I was in a band that was leading a group of young adults, and I was just sort of playing at first, and then it was portrayed to me like, hey, we're here leading people in song for a purpose. And then it was really given to me as this is the purpose. And then I was sort of understood that we had a calling, or at least we've been put into a position where I guess you're attempting to speak truths through the music to glorify God, not yourself. And that really changed. That really just opened up, I guess, my heart at that point. I was being converted, or was converted, in that position. And I made a confession of faith and baptized, in college. But at that point, if I believe that was where the calling and the drawing to God had occurred at that point, because I'd been exposed to the true gospel, or the word that I think softened my heart truly. And that was just the means by which it occurred. The means are different for other people, but.
Mm-hmm. So when you play the music, this trying to give expression to truth, so how does that change what you're doing? Like, are you trying to draw something from outside of you into the room? Like is there a phenomenological aspect to that?
I don't know if it's phenomenological. I think just for me, it sort of puts it codifies the truth of what I am doing and the purpose. So it's sort of like many people have a particular ability to do things when they're born. Everyone has a certain abilities. But when a person is transformed or changed, those abilities are beginning in a process of sanctification, I would call it, or correction. And so you start to have a new heart and a new orientation around what you're doing and the purpose behind what you're doing, albeit imperfect. I say, as far as like God is concerned, imperfect, but the goal, the orientation of your life is radically changed in a way that's hard to describe. But the best way I can describe it is, you're much more intentional about what you're doing as you're convicted of the gravity of your required obedience to God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're bound by a set of constraints.
Yeah.
Did you experience being bound by a set of constraints, and did you just swap the constraints, or was that like a new experience?
I think in many ways it's more difficult because there's a set of constraints placed on you that requires submission. That's hard to. So if you're unconverted, or you're, let's say a non-believer, you may do things thinking that they have no ultimate impact on you or others. It's just something you do for your own good pleasure. I think when one's converted, you realize that all that you're doing is for God's good pleasure. So it's harder in some ways to pursue that, because it's so easy to slip into, well, I don't like this. I would rather do what I want to do. Now, how do you know what to do? And that's a good, who tells you what to do? I think it's twofold. There's conviction that happens with a changed heart, by way of the law. And then there's also the body of believers in church, and those who hold you accountable. And both of those are for your, to prosper you, not materially per se, but to, continue to shape your life toward God.
Mm-hmm. So I assume that you had accountability in the choir practice and stuff as well. So, like, did there something change in the type of accountability?
I don't know. It may have been the same, as far as the accountability was at that point, and I may have even been told this before. I'd have to think about it. Why did I not? When I was singing in a choir in a small church when I was much younger, maybe they had told me at that time, even, hey, you're singing for a particular purpose here. You're leading music for the church. There's, we have a very high calling here that must be taken seriously. And I think what I at that point I was merely thinking of the music on the page, meaning like it's I must seriously execute these lyrics and pitches correctly in unison with the choir, as opposed to what I experienced later, which was no, the perfection in your music is not the goal. The goal is to do this in truth, in spirit, because God commands it of you. Um, that's a different constraint. Um, and I think there what how things happen and when they happen in people's lives is interestingly timed by God alone. But I'm sure that at some point when I was younger, it was hey, we're leading the choir for this particular Easter service. We're talking about Christ and the resurrection. Where it's a serious thing, and for me, it was mere ceremony for the music itself. And so, instance, I just sort of saw the Easter service as a medium by which I could deliver a quality piece of music, as opposed to delivering a quality worship that would be pleasing to God.
Hmm. So in some sense, you got eyes to see, and
Yeah,
that shifted the way that you were participating. Did you
sure.
also develop ears to hear whether other people were participating in truth? Like, is that a quality that you can discern when other people play music?
I don't know. It's hard sometimes. I mean, I think you do get. I think there's some discernment that comes for someone who's born again with new eyes. There is some new discernment, but sometimes it's harder than others. It's hard to judge the heart, but of another person directly. You can sort of. I mean, there's very blatant violations of God's law that are easy to see, but I don't know. That's a good question. I would say in the context of the choir or the context of the band, no. I mean, I think that I probably saw people or listened or heard people um, performing in a certain way that was difficult to distinguish between truth and not because they were just so talented. Um, but I don't know that I think there is a particular set of like, hey, I feel as though we're called to do this particular song for this particular service, and we want to be sure that when we do this, we are putting forth our best foot in effort and practice. I don't know if it didn't make me the ultimate judge of their truthfulness. It just, but it gave me a way to discern myself, which then I think I can observe in others in a certain sense.
Hmm. So, but you did get admonished, right? So, did the person who admonished you, do you believe that they did see the truth or lack of truth in your play?
Um, I would imagine that's interesting. Did they see the lack of truth? I don't know. That's a good way to see it. I would say yeah, they probably did, or at least they saw that it didn't fit the parameters that had been set forth by them or by Scripture.
Hmm.
So I think that's one way to see it. I think what happens is when someone is convicted, born again, and given new eyes to see, and they see the law of God and the regulative principle set forth in Scripture, you take it seriously. Whereas before, maybe it wasn't taken seriously. But and also like when if you believe that Scripture is in church is ultimately required of you to understand it, and I mean like not understand it to a degree that you're a philosopher or something. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is when your pursuit is that you become more familiar with it, whether that's through the teachings of others or actually reading it and being convicted by its words or the admonition from others because they're put in a position of authority in your life. You take it seriously differently than one who isn't maybe who isn't a believer.
Okay, so um, yeah, is that trajectory still unfolding, or is that kind of the place where you're at?
Yeah, I think it's still unfolding. I think that you're constantly becoming more familiar, convicted, growing in your sanctification. Um, and so in some ways it creates a sense of freedom. In other ways, it creates a sense of boundaries um, that are healthy but difficult. Um, I think that there's some places where you can fall into a legalistic tendency of like these are very specific ways you must do things, or can you understand that these are ways that you can do things that are good, but is it required that they look this particular specific way all the time for what purpose? And I think what happens is when you realize the purposes of music or the purposes of this situation is to glorify God, you have to pursue that in spirit and truth. The perfection element is not something that you are ultimately concerned with. You're ultimately concerned with God.
Mm-hmm. So is that something that propagated to your other aspects of music making as well, or like is going to church distinct from you playing on your own?
Yeah, I think sometimes I've thought about that a lot. There's some aspects that makes it easier to write music or perform it because you have a serious wealth of knowledge to pull from the church realm or from scripture. And there's other aspects where you are like, I'm writing music here. Um, it it's worldly, or it's based in my own passions and desires that are you know of the world, meaning like ultimately sin. But it's fun. And so I think you tend to evaluate, at least I tend to evaluate my music that I would write under a different lens. But I constantly have this kind of um battle, as it were, to music I consume, listen to, or enjoy. Is it hostile to God? Meaning, like, is it specifically stating a number of things that are not, um, for instance, like I'm a music guy more than a lyrics guy, right? So I can appreciate lots of music and instrumentation and virtuosity, quality musicianship, and ignore lyrics. It's a constant, not a constant, but it's something that I concern myself with because I'm not convicted of, like, I don't feel that the music that has lyrics that are terrible lyrics that you wouldn't think are healthy for a Christian. They don't really seem to affect me in a way, meaning like I'm not taking them as gospel truth, or they're not affecting my life or any particular way. Because but in some ways I kind of sometimes I feel as though maybe I should be more discerning with the input that I decide to participate in. Because is that what God requires of me? And so that's a constant battle that I've struggled with because I love some of the musical aspects so much of lots of what I consider to be ungodly music or secular music or whatever that might be. So I think what's happened as I've grown in my convictions and sanctification is that I've tried more and more to steer clear of things that are potentially harmful, but not just to me, to others. Like if I'm listening to a particular type of music, and my children hear it, and they're not going to have the same heart or understanding or Christian liberty that I might have. And so they're going to ask, well, what these lyrics, because, maybe I'm not listening to the lyrics, but they are. And they're going to say, well, this doesn't square with what I've been told to believe. And why, and so I'll have to either reevaluate that myself, let them come up with it themselves, or reorient them. And I do think as parents, we are called to reorient our children in the ways of God. But, I just want to be more discerning with that sort of thing. That was a long answer.
Is there also like music that disgusts you? Like, is there like a sensibility, like a moral sensibility that you've gained?
It's kind of similar to the last one. I think there are some lyrics in music that tend to make it very hard for me to digest them and without disgust lyrically, because the content is so, sometimes brutally ungodly or, hostile to God. But music wise, as far as like instrumentation, tonality, I don't have a discuss. I actually enjoy so many different types, if not all types. I mean, it's hard to say all because I haven't heard everything under the sun, but I can find a particular aspect of almost any genre of music and enjoy it. Whether it's virtuosity, its rhythm, its play with tonality, its juxtaposition with the beautiful and the ugly at the same time. Can I see that there? Does it appeal to me? I'm really drawn to musicianship generally, so that's why it's hard because there could be horribly, even occultist, satanic, or otherwise evil sounding music that I can appreciate because of its musicianship or its musicality. And so I have to, work on that sometimes because I think that if I were to consume that often, is that the best use of my time? I don't know if it is.
So, like it seems to me that you narrow in on an aspect of participation and say like, okay, this is able to be lifted up or something, and then you quaternize all these other things and say I'm not dealing with them, and you feel pretty comfortable with doing that for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, sort of like compartmentalizing. I'm able to do that. Yeah, I am I comfortable with that?
Well,
Sometimes I
do you think
worry
that
about
that
it.
is something that God would want, the compartmentalization? Is that a
I think it could be a serious shortcoming for some Christians. Yeah, because you're basically stating like, well, let me put God in this particular region of my thought and not in this one. And I do think that it's a serious it's a potentially moral failing or a failing of obedience in some ways. Yeah. So I'm fully in admission that that's something that I have to either I need to submit that aspect to God and just state like I need to be much more diligent in my approach to what I believe is what my convictions. In other words, I shouldn't harden my conscience against something because I like its feeling that it gives me. And I should probably be, and I think I have gotten a lot better in that regard. But there still are a number of pieces of music that I love to listen to that maybe aren't edifying, or building or good for my walk with God. But in other aspects, I don't find that I'm not compartmentalizing because I don't find that they've harmed my relationship with God or others in the church. And in fact, they embolden or help hone my skills in music, right? Which I use with the church and the body. So I find that to be okay in my case. But I would never tell a person to ignore their convictions and compartmentalize them. In fact, I would tell them to listen to their convictions.
Yeah, so I hear that you're justifying true redemption, which is that in accordance with Christian teaching?
Justifying true redemption.
Uh-huh.
Justification comes in Christ alone, so I'm not doing the justifying there. So the only justifying that I'm doing is stating that I understand that justification comes from Christ.
Okay. So there was an aspect when we started off where you're talking about giving expressions to things in yourself, and bringing them out. So I assume that trajectory ran parallel to your singing in choir and stuff. So how did that evolution go?
I guess it's hard for me to follow the question. The evolution of which aspect?
Well, your self-expression, right? Like bringing your inside, your feelings out. Like
Okay.
is that a skill, or is that
Oh,
more
I
something
see.
that is experienced as a side effect? Or?
Um, I think it's gotten. I mean, I think initially you kind of get, better at doing it as you do it more, and you're also corrected. I kind of see it like someone who's learning to walk, or to run or to ride a bike, or to, they have a number of passions that they hold, and they're, sort of like grow as a child grows into its mature self and control of its physical body more, it can walk more, firmly and strongly and straightly, and then be very confident in that, and then they can run, and then now they're running marathons and quarter miles in 10 seconds. So um, that's, I think, what happens in that case is you get molded by the Spirit from being born again. You get molded by the your elders in your life and your authority in the body of believers and your brothers and sisters, that hold you close to them in an effort to prosper you, and help correct your shortcomings. Not that they can truly atone for them or something, or correct them ultimately, but they can point you in a direction that is correct, for your Christian walk. So I think that's gotten better in that regard.
Mm-hmm. So did you intentionally share these personal creations then, for feedback? Like, is there a process that you go through?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's been less and less in recent years as as I have a family and work and life, and I don't create as often as I used to, and then put it out there for people to listen to, or critique or whatever. But there's been many times in the past where I've written songs for church, or for some, for a band I may have been in, or for others to listen to. And yeah, I've heard a couple of different people critique even the lyrics or the content, and sort of give me a better position, around it. Well, a long time ago, a friend of mine, had heard a song that I'd written, and he came to me and said, "Hey, I think this is great, but you have some lyrics here that I think you may not have meant to say them this way." Because, in other words, some of the lyrics were lyrics of uh the specific lyrics were, earning a prize, and I wasn't, when he was correcting me and say, "Well, you're not earning a prize, you're being given a prize because of Christ." So that sort of theological correction. And then there's also just musical correction from people that say, "Well, hey, okay, I can hear the recording here. You went to the studio, you did this work, and I think you need to go back because there's some problems there." And what happens is, as I've grown, and it's a maturity thing, I think it's a sanctification thing, you take that feedback better, because you see the intention. It's, sometimes the intention is evil, but even what person who has evil intention can still shed light on something for you that may make you correct an otherwise errored output.
So, can you give an example, like where you're not able to take feedback? Like, what would prevent you from taking feedback?
Well, I think that there's preferential feedback that you could get that are just merely preferences. People that have a particular preference in their musical tastes. Sometimes that feedback isn't exactly uh helpful. It's helpful in a way that if you wanted to appeal to that person's preferences, but it's not something you should adopt as your own preferences, and take their position and say, "Well, okay, I should change all that I'm doing because they have a particular preference." I don't. You have to be able to discern that, though, because I do think that, especially as musicians, it's easy to take people's preferences and then say, "Well, this is the way I should be doing things," and now you're changing your approach to fulfill the preferences of another, and not, writing and producing music that is true from your position. Now, I'd say, like, the truth ultimately for Christians, true from ultimate truth, right? From Scripture alone, or from God's position. You would want to portray those truths as accurate as you can, and judge them against the ultimate judge, which is Scripture through the discernment of your church. But there's also, like, a particular flavor that you put on things that is unique sometimes, and you don't need to take the feedback of a person's preference and then change your preferences, per se.
So yeah, so there's in some sense the timeless, and then there's the in time, right?
Hmm.
And that you're trying to draw out the timelessness into the music, and then you're shaping it into your image, right? As well as hopefully God's image.
Hmm.
Um, and so you're talking about the discernment around whether there's an actual misapprehension of truth, or that, yeah, you're just shaping something in your idiosyncratic way. Um, so is I assume that's also a sense that you've developed over time, whether like that, what is coming from you, and what's not coming from you, and maybe that's also where your ability to take criticism, or at least deal or identify criticism, comes from.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think also what happens as one grows in their faith, especially you, I think you learn to hate your sin more. In other words, you welcome the rebuke from your fellow brothers, because you know that the covenant that you have, the bond you have with the body of the church is one that's two-way, and so you welcome that, and it's harder I think in my youth it was harder to take that criticism, um, and understand that it was good for me. Um, I think there are some people that probably are better at that, but that definitely seems to be a temperament of youth, that seems to arise that people. It's very hard to take critique, even if it's or calling out of sin, or those sorts of things, because you think that they're stifling your um, stifling your life in some way. They're giving you constraints. But in reality, I think that they're actually freeing you from a bondage to uh, a nature of individual sort of loneliness in a way. So you're not alone with your creative endeavors. You have a body that you're a part of.
Yeah, so right, like you are a part of a body, in many things, right? And so um, there's a grounding outside of yourself there, right? And in some sense, because it's grounding outside of yourself, the criticism isn't personal
Mm-hmm.
either, right? Like there's a, yeah, it doesn't fall upon you as your person, right? On your identity, because like if you look at society nowadays, right, like people really feel attacked when there's criticism, because they feel it's about them, right? It's not about an idea that they have. No, like they are the idea, and so it falls together with themselves. And yeah, creating that distance is something that's part of uh, becoming mature, but it's also part of committing, right, to a conviction. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you don't make that commitment, then you never create that space. Um, so yeah, like do you feel like we've reached at present times, or like is there maybe like with your children, like did they influence the way that you do music?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an aspect of which where you have children and you like to share. I like to share my love of music with my children, um, and I enjoy teaching them, and it helps me refine my skills because I have to get better at teaching. So that's been great. Again, like I was saying earlier, it helps me to be better discerning around my tastes or my inputs, because you know I'm I can't I can't continue to give my children a proper framing that I think is correct and glorifying to God if myself I am consuming um, uh, godless or worldly pursuits in music. So you know, children are there as a mirror in a way, but also as sort of a picture of what it's like um, to be accountable. So, I think that is that's why I count all of my children as amazing blessings because I'm given that gift from God to to raise them um, and pursue music with them is so much fun. But also it's challenging too in a way because I'm challenged in my beliefs, my convictions, I'm challenged in my preferences, and even my skills. So I think it would be easy for people to run away from that challenge in some ways, because you could just throw your hands up and just be like, hey, rules for thee, not for me. You know, I'm the dad. I do what I want. And I think that that's true in a sense, but not ultimately um, the best. I think if you're looking at it honestly, and I think in the way that the Lord is pushing me to understand His relationship with me and mine with my children, is that they are there to be raised, and in order to do that, I have to submit myself as well to truly to what the calling is. So that's I think that's the growth.
Hmm. So it seems like they allow you to draw upon a place that you couldn't draw on before. Um, so yeah, like how do you think about that? Like, don't you feel a little bit, uh, well, I guess frustrated that you can't get there yourself, that you need them to prompt you to make these corrections in your life?
I
What's your
never thought
stance
about
on
that.
that?
Um, no, I actually no, I've never felt that way. That that frustrated that I couldn't get it on my own in some way. I think that's kind of the sanctifying process of having children. It's sort of it's I think that's also why people are called to have children partly. Um, there are some that are not. I think that's rare, um, ultimately. But yeah, raising children, whether it's your children or even let's say it's your brothers and sisters, if you have many of them, or your cousins or aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces, when those younger people are put into your life and you take seriously the responsibility of raising them, you really, like I said, you're looking in the mirror a bit, and you become convicted of your own shortcomings, um, even more so. So I actually embrace that because I'm happy to be continually convicted of my shortcomings. I think that's good.
Well, yeah, yeah, I think that's good as well. And so yeah, like I guess I was pointing at the need. So there's a dependence there, right? Like there's the the social constraints or something are driving you beyond yourself. I guess that's what I'm pointing at. And well, yeah, you can be receptive to that, or you can, like you said, you can wave your hand at it.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, like if you can see the beauty in it, and you can wield that as an actual spiritual uh, engine, I guess. Um, yeah, that is beautiful.
Yeah.
Um,
It is beautiful.
so yeah, so I guess I want to point at the teaching a little bit still, because I've been finding this pattern where, yeah, first you don't know anything, right? And then you kind of know how to play music in this case, right? And then you're exploring the space, and then when you're teaching, you're getting this other relationship, right? You now have to translate the thing that is natural to you in a way that other people can participate with, which again provides this mirror to yourself. So maybe you want to expand a little bit on that.
Yeah. I think that I'm finding that it's challenging in a different way. There was a challenge growing up with like teachers or bandmates or choir members or people like that would challenge you. But there's a difference there that is not in your children, and the difference is you're aim in many ways you're aiming to please the teacher, and and not understanding as much that it's about you and your growth. You're really just looking to please that person or check the box. With children, the feedback that you get from them is different because really you're molding their feedback as well. So there could be sort of a feedback loop that occurs if you're not careful in your children. But I think if you're approaching it when you approach it that way, you're seeing yourself in your children as they critique you, because you've also given them these values and and these sorts of um, teachings that they're using to critique you. So that grows you in a way that's not like other things. And so it also can improve, I think, your skill set, because you really hone in on the specifics, and get better at fundamentals sometimes that you may have forgotten or taken for granted, and you have to now I mean trying to teach my 5-year-old or 9-year-old, how do you listen to a tone and match it. Like it's hard for me to tell them this is how you breathe. This is how you put the air through your lungs and throat and voice and vocal cords and sing this pitch. I have to like really consider all of the aspects of that from a fundamental perspective to get that understanding portrayed across. And sometimes it's futile because I don't have the language to portray it very well sometimes. So you give them the information you have, but you also model it for them. And so they're getting both things. They're getting the modeling and the information. And you have to be very deliberate about what you're telling them, because you want to be clear. And that's a different skill, and that's why teaching is so hard. But I also think that it's good for you to grow in that regard.
Mhm.
And it improves you as a musician in many ways.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you pointed out a distinction between teaching your children and teaching in general, right? Where uh yeah, like they're in some sense like the images of you, and that obviously changes the dynamic uh, with feedback, because you also are in multiple roles towards them, right? You're not only their teacher, you're their caregiver, and you're their playmate, and all of
Mm-hmm.
these, which if you'd be an external individual, you wouldn't have to deal with. Um, and I guess that gives you tools, but it also presents a bunch of handicaps at the same time.
Yep. Well, I think that's part of the beauty of it is those guardrails that come with that, the handicaps, as it were, are not shackles to hurt you, but to refine you. Now, I also think that's what God does with his convicting spirit, Holy Spirit. It's not to confine you to a particular mold that you don't want. It's to mold you to what you were created to be.
Okay, so if we take this towards the future, um, well, you now have three aspects, right? Like one is effectively in church, in worship, then you have your personal expression, and then you have your relationship with your children. So if you have 5 perfect years where you can do everything you want, and it all goes well, how do you see yourself? Like, what are you doing in 5 years?
I think it's more. Honestly, it's more of the same. I'm for 5, I'm looking for consistency over 5 years, not progress per se. So I'm looking for a consistent relationship with my church and my family that grows together. My children, I think, in 5 years would be, we would be creating music together. I think at that point we would be performing together, maybe even writing, especially my older children together, and they would experience that skill. I think, which is a useful skill of taking what they read or what they feel or what they've been told or what they hear and putting it into practice. Let's create. And even if that creation isn't original, it's the process of doing it that gives them, I think, motivation going forward, and a skill that they'll love and hopefully cherish and pass on to their children, but also help them grow in other aspects of their life. You know, so that in 5 years, I hope that I pray that I continue that direction, and I also pray that it inspires other families to continue the pursuit of music as a skill in their lives, and not merely a pastime, but a useful tool in worship, and in practical life. I think that the pursuit of music can be wonderfully joyful. I think it can be a lot of fun. It can be a bonding that is unlike others. Similar to dancing in some ways. It's intimate. It's original in some ways, but it's also derived, and you're striking at an objective beauty, and you're looking to put that into your world, into your life, and basically, like, how can I manifest the objective beauty that God has set forth through music. And I think that's, hopefully I am seeing that happen in my family in the next 5 years, even more so.
Mm-hmm. So a different way of saying that is that you seem to think that you've figured out what you're supposed to be doing, and so you don't have a growth left that you need to make. Like, is that a good summary?
Well, I was just morally speaking, like, I don't have a goal of like writing another album or doing a show or doing some particular musical endeavor. My role is to continue in teaching and leading my family, children, and my church. Not I don't have a
So
goal of like
let's take the
creation.
church for example, right? Like, would you aspire to make changes to what they're doing, or are you more like sat and know that like what is happening is correct, and I'm just gonna better participate in what's happening?
Um, no, I think that we're continually improving one another's skills, devotion, a relationship with one another, growing closer as a family, a body of believers. So I'm not complacent in that I think I figured it out or achieved it or something like that. But I'm stating that I would like to see, consistent pattern of building relationships, and consistent pattern of, devotion to God and the church, um, that way.
So, are, is the implication that the forming of the bond is in itself going to bring the innovation if there's innovation needed?
Yeah, I think so. I think growing in sanctification together it will bring forth more truths, and we can implement them easier if we're unified.
Mm-hmm. So that is interesting. So, um, is there a sharing of these truths? Like, is there a process that you guys deal with it? It's like, oh, I figured this out, and like, how can we incorporate that, for example?
I think just consistent gathering together, reading the word, prayers, songs, worshiping together, creating a strong, as I think as you have growth in your spiritual life and sanctification, you grow together as the body becomes one. So you start to see that, that happen more. And so the process is consistent prayer, consistent gathering, consistent sharing, and steady worship.
Mhm. So when you're saying the body becoming one, is that like you gain a shared vision, um, and
Yeah, I
there,
think, the people become more Christ-like. Everyone as you grow in sanctification, you become more oriented to Christ.
yeah, but I'm looking at uh the ability to relate to, I guess, new information, right? So
Mhm. Um, I think, I mean, it gives you more resolve, more ability to navigate life's difficulties in the proper orientation and not get thrown by the wayside with the winds of the day. You're firmly grounded together.
yeah, like I I want to point at the togetherness, right? Like, so what does it mean to be grounded together? I guess like how do yeah, how does that manifest?
Oh, like practically speaking, I think I think you see more people engaging on a regular basis with one another in relationships. So, coming to church consistently, calling one another, praying for one another, asking for one another to help them bear their burdens, assisting one another, um, you know, uh, fighting the battles of the day with each other in consistently, um, discussing the matters of the day in a biblical way, in a Christian way, and not a mere pragmatic way per se. You're constantly being reformed to Christ, and so your level of thought and engagement um, gets more unified on that front.
Hmm. Yep, and so when like when there's something happening, coming in as a group, right? And like how does that allow a bonded group deal with something that a non-bonded group can't deal with it? Like where's the strength of the bond?
Yeah, I
In
think when you're alone or in lower numbers or difficulty arises, I think it's easy to hole up and be a loner, or even get sucked into the ways of the world. Meaning, you start to really get stooped in sin or self doubt, lack of assurance, lack of steadfast prayer, because you feel as though your fruit is rotten, or you feel as though there is no fruit because there's no one bearing it with you and building you up together, and helping you to understand that there is, showing them the grace that you are also afforded. And so that bond and that unity in the group is ultimately not something you can experience on your own.
yeah, so um I'm gonna try a, a little bit again, but uh so if a viewer hasn't experienced that for themselves, what would you tell them?
Has an experience like the body or the group.
Right.
um I would tell them, to, in the same way that the pursuit of music tends to be uh difficult and a growing process that comes with time and understanding. I'd tell them to continue that pursuit of unity with a group. I would also tell them to evaluate themselves when they look at the group and see if they are looking for reasons not to be a part of some particular group. And maybe some of those reasons are selfish, or some of those reasons are not giving enough grace and understanding to yourself and to the group that you would want them to give to you. And so I think there's that. I think also there's, you have to do something to be, you have to try to walk and be a part of a group gathering in order to be there. Now there are some cases where someone is just pulled in to the group and by some, I don't know, some miraculous method, but you have to put one foot in, sort of in the pool in order to get the whole body in the pool. So you got to try a little bit. Also, I think it's you have to be okay with some hard conversations and difficult pushback that may be uncomfortable, because it's also uncomfortable for others too, but that uncomfortable feeling is shared. So you're not alone in your feelings of despair, depravity, or difficulties. Everyone has these sorts of failings, and so I think that once you start to understand that these people are not looking to um, looking to fight you as much as they're looking to um, bring you into the pleasant meal that they're having. Um, that's what I would say. There's more practical approaches, I think, depending on the situation, the circumstances. But um, in the case of like using music as an example, um, if you're listening to music, someone enjoys music, uh, you can appreciate that was done by a group of people in most cases, whether it's producer and engineer or entire choir, or look at what you're experiencing and enjoying. That group or that body of people that put that together work together to do so, and so you can be a part of that same experience when you are a part of the body.
And like you said, right, like you develop a new means to see yourself as a consequence of going through the process.
Right.
Um, yeah, so no wish to make like this one song that you've been postponing forever, or like it's nothing like that.
Yeah, I mean, not really. I will say that's really become. I don't have the fire like I once did when I was younger to create new music. Yeah, I don't know why that is. It's hard to. I don't know if it's a lack of time or inspiration or something. It's not been on the front of my to-do list for a long time. I enjoy writing music. I really enjoy sitting in like jam sessions or improvising and things like that. But I don't have this like creative desire to create new pieces of music like I once did. I'm not really sure why. I think it's because I just have other meaning that I'm pursuing, which is like, like I said, family, group, church, building that up. And so I think my desires for creation of music has been reoriented.
Okay, that sounds like we've come to the end. Is there a lesson that you've drawn from this conversation, or a realization that you've made?
Um, but I think that I've come to realize like I think you challenged me a bit on compartmentalization, bringing light to the fact that there may be things that I indulge in musically that are not uh, probably not ideal. Um, and I should probably get even more serious about killing that aspect of sin or compartmentalization, and pursuing the good even more, which is God.
Okay, well, I'd invite everybody to leave their own insights or lessons in the comment section so that Bruce can enjoy that as a feedback and criticism. And
It is
yeah,
the internet, so.
do you want to have a closing statement, Bruce?
um, Yeah, I mean, I would say my closing statement would be go to church, enjoy music for what it is, but also, anyone and everyone that's involved in watching or listening to this, if you haven't, I would strongly encourage people to pursue the creative arts of music in some way, whether that's in the corporate worship or in creation of your own, or learning an instrument, or learning to sing, or enjoying music for more than just a pastime activity, but an intentional worshipful act.
Okay. Well, thank you for being a nice guest. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I see you guys on the next episode of Unfolding the Soul.
Thanks.